Hello, and welcome to the live NonProfit Pro webinar, 5 Ways Fundraisers Can Beat the Effects of Inflation, sponsored by Gorriarán Solutions. I'm Amanda Cole, NonProfit Pro's editor-in-chief and host of today's event. Before we get started, let me take a second to point out the resources widget at the bottom of your console. It looks like an open book. If you missed the tech tips video we played leading up to the webinar, you can always click this widget for more information on how to use your console and access other webinar resources such as today's slides. Here today to discuss how nonprofits can beat the effects of inflation, we have Michael Gorriarán, president of Gorriarán Solutions. With that, I'll hand it over to Michael.
Okay, Amanda, thank you very much. So apologize for the technical difficulties getting started there. I'm hoping that you're still with us and that you enjoy this discussion to this presentation today. So I'm going to be speaking about the 5 ways that fundraisers can beat the effects of inflation with fundraising and the behavioral economics modeling services that we provide with our proprietary AI. So in today's environment, it's very important with respect to fundraising to understand donor sentiment in real time. And with our AI, we've been able to uncover over the last 8 years very precise ways of measuring donor sentiment in real time and converting those calculations into precise ask amounts for gift strings. And they do 2 things basically net is they allow you to get the right type of response rate from donors because the values that are calculated are very precise to that donor's relationship to the nonprofit, and we're reflecting clearly their sentiment to the nonprofit. And the other piece of it is in controlling expenses, which is particularly important in this current environment, where we're able to determine whom should be mailed at what point in time. So the combination of these 2 factors and a variety of services we have to offer allow you to optimize giving over a lifetime of giving while retaining donors and minimizing your expenses so your fundraising is performing at the desired state in terms of managing inflation. So if I look at my background real quick, just as an overview, I've been with Gorriarán Solutions almost 5 years now. Prior to that, I spent about 35 years actually between Microsoft and Xerox. With the Microsoft, I spent a lot of time on artificial intelligence and applying it to a variety of business challenges. So I'm very familiar with how it can be used, what it can be used for, and that's been instrumental in bringing this advanced capability to nonprofit organizations. While I am thinking about it, the one thing I would say that's been really important for us in working with nonprofits is we only deliver this as a simple service. The nice thing about that is there's nothing to deploy. There's no technical training that has to take place, no special hiring, nothing. You're just allowing us to deliver this as a service for you, and it optimizes your fundraising while lowering the cost per dollar raised. My experience in nonprofit came from one single entity several years back where I was involved as the founding member and board chair of the Oregon Council for Hispanic Advancement. And in that organization, we actually set the charter, built it up, created our fundraising. It was a very instrumental and informative part of my engagement with the nonprofit sector. I then went on to working with my wife where she was on the board of the Boys and Girls Aid Society here in Oregon where we make our home. And I was very active with her helping out with that organization. So I have on the small side a great appreciation for nonprofits and the challenges with fundraising. But over the last 5 years, we've been serving a multitude of nonprofits with these advanced artificial intelligence services and doing it very effectively in a diversity of fundraising environments, especially through COVID and then now through inflation, where we've been able to help people grow while reducing their cost per dollar invested in fundraising. So our business, as I started to allude to, is a decisions as a service business. And so what we do is basically we're rendering the decision about how much to ask and whom to ask, and whether it's digital or it's in direct mail at this moment in time. And what we are delivering back is 2 things. One is a behavioral economic model that is of your whole entity. So we build this over rounds and rounds and rounds of solicitations where this model gets built that is specific only to one nonprofit. It's not useful or valuable in any other instance, any other organization. It's very personalized, and this is what we're delivering, personalization at scale. Is this particular model is pertinent only to the way in which your donors interact and behave with you from a giving standpoint. What we do inside of that model is on a monthly basis, when we're rendering these decisions, it is specific to that donor's relationship to your organization. So we don't care about their behavior elsewhere. This is specifically about the behavioral economic model for that particular donor at that moment in time that allows you to optimize their giving while lowering the cost per dollar raised. So if I look at the, here we go, the details behind our business, we were established in 2013 by a professor of decision sciences at Johns Hopkins University. You may have heard of him. His name is Adam Treiser. He's still about 38, 39 years old, but he's published quite a bit in this particular field and has lectured on it extensively. And what he was able to discern back then is the opportunity to take several flavors of artificial intelligence and weave them together to be able to reflect donor sentiment in this case, or consumer sentiment in a broader view. So we were in R&D for about 4 years, and then in 2018, I joined the organization. We brought this capability to nonprofits across the industry. And what we gained over the last 4 years was a deep level of domain expertise in delivering AI services and optimizing the nonprofit organization's fundraising that we work with while keeping the cost per dollar raised, getting lower and lower over the course of time. We've processed, and this is extremely important, almost 10 billion records through the system in 4 years. So the level of precision and insight we've been able to garner is profound when you think about running that many records through the system. We start out with small pilots so we can demonstrate the financial capability of influencing donors and then keeping the cost per dollar raised low. And through those small pilots, they tend to grow very, very quickly, as you can tell by the number of records processed. But we've influenced over $100 billion in donations in 4 years. So the agenda for today I'm going to talk about is fivefold. One is how can we focus on improving net proceeds, not just fundraising on top dollar, but net proceeds, and the way you can use AI to do this in an inflationary environment. How do we optimize donor lifetime value in that same direction? And then how do we personalize in the moment of time that is necessary the relationship investment decisions at scale? So when you're about to engage the donor, how do you decide when to do that? And there's a unique formula for each individual donor that we'll talk about that helps you optimize the nice economic model of raising and lowering costs. So personalizing that decision about making the investment in soliciting them or engaging with them. And then finding new value in the lapsed donor campaign. So we do a tremendous amount of work in lapsed. We love lapsed. It's a phenomenal way to re-engage donors at the right amount to keep them as a sustaining donor. And then lastly, how to measure fundraising performance. So these are the 5 topics for today. So today's fundraising environment, I'm going to talk about inflation, obviously. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we handle that, but I would like to get your feedback on how you see inflation in your environment. So I'd like you to pick the one that reflects mostly your sentiment here, if you would, please. And let me see, is it something that, what's inflation? The first response is your organization feeling the impact of inflation. No, what's inflation is the first response. The second one is no, not yet, but we see it coming. The third one is yes, it is becoming an increasing issue. And the fourth one, D, is yes, it hurts. So if you could please select your response here, I'd appreciate it. So looks like we have it's climbing quickly. So is your organization feeling the impact of inflation? And just pick one of the responses, please. So I'm going to advance this a little bit and see how we're doing. Okay, so no, not yet, but we're seeing it coming was 32%. Yes, it's becoming an increasing issue, 52%, so pretty substantial. And yes, it hurts is 16%. So if you look at this, about 2/3 of you are having material issues with inflation right now in your operations. So this is the right place to be for you because that's what we're going to address. And for those of you who are in the B section, about 32% that see it coming, hopefully you'll be able to get some advancement in your thinking about how to manage that with some of these capabilities along with other things you're considering right now, and really do a great job in the next iteration of your fundraising activities over 2022 and 2023. So if we look a little further at this, today's fundraising environment, the headlines say it all. We just literally took these right out of the headlines. It's all of a sudden you're starting to see a shift in donor sentiment. And it has had 2 factors involved, which has been fascinating, not just inflation, but COVID before inflation. And the headlines say it all, as giving is down, the number of gifts are down, and the average value per gift is down. And when you look at where things have moved up, if that's been possible in your environment, a lot of it has been driven by episodic giving, in the sense that someone has a strong sentiment. I'll talk about this further, for a particular cause at a particular moment in time. And when you strip that away, the underlying donation strength is not where it used to be. And there are ways of taking those two things apart where you can see the difference. And then getting people to renew and remain active outside of episodic giving is really the trick to the equation, is keeping the faithful faithful. So if I look at this a little further, the personal experience that I know I had and I talk to people about is very common across society, is that once my family was vaccinated in the third quarter of last year, we had gone through the battery of vaccinations. And we decided, okay, we're going to go out and start living again. So the first thing we started doing was, going out for dinner, doing other types of entertainment, like going to concerts or going to a movie theater, potentially, all risky behaviors during COVID. We started getting those back online. We started traveling a little bit, which was a really big deal for us because we love to travel. And in that time frame, which started about September of 2021, all of a sudden my disposable income started dropping like a stone because I was spending it on other things that I had not been spending it on during COVID. So as a result of that, when I get into the fourth quarter, and I'm sure many of you felt the same way, the ability to make gifts and make them as generously as you had during COVID was simply not there because your spending levels had shifted materially. So the first wave we saw, and we started detecting this, as I mentioned, in September of 2021, was that all of a sudden there was less elasticity with donors. And this was particularly acute below $75 in annual giving. So when I look at what happened, in 73% of our population is below $100. If you look at the donors that we are engaging through our services, it's direct response fundraising. We go up to a very high level in giving, up to $10,000 actually per year. But if you look at the bulk of our population, it's actually lower. And all of a sudden, we started seeing that there was less disposable income in the fourth quarter of last year. And donors in this $50 to $75 range in particular were less flexible. They had less elasticity. So we were not securing the same level of growth that we normally see in donations. Our average, by the way, while I'm thinking about it, is about 12% in a given year of moving people up in their giving levels while not losing donors. And we were not seeing that. We were seeing 4 or 5% all of a sudden in lift. 4 or 5% is still great, don't get me wrong, but it was an environment where we realized that something had fundamentally shifted. So in the fundraising cost area, at the same time where donors were behaving in a less elastic manner, all of a sudden you had a situation where the cost of direct mail fundraising in particular was going up substantially. So whether it was paper or it was the postage, the little envelope windows, those types of things were really going up quickly. The envelope itself was in very short supply. Postage was going up. So we started seeing all these things materially changing. And the worst ones were actually freight and labor, where we saw those spike a lot, an average of about 20%. I don't know what you experienced, but in the interviews I do with clients, this was the reality of their fundraising environment. The problem was this was generating about a 15 to 20% increase in fundraising expenses for direct response. And at the same time, you had a situation where donors were less elastic. So the tendency was, I need to mail more because my donors are not giving at the same rate. And basically that was a financial hole that was being dug deeper and deeper and deeper, where the more you mailed and the less donations that came in, the more of an issue was created in terms of the financial performance of fundraising, in terms of producing the proceeds to advance the cause. The shift that took place in people's minds then was, let's move everything to digital. If we're in a situation we can't afford to keep up with these cost increases, let's maybe think about mailing less and let's move it to digital. The problem with that decision making, and I've been selling digital infrastructure most of my career, 35 years, whether it was Microsoft or Xerox, and there is no such thing as a free infrastructure. And it doesn't get less expensive the more you use it, because if you use it more and more and more, donors disengage, they unsubscribe, or they have no regard for your engagement through email because you're sending it too frequently. So whether it is with direct mail or it is with email or any type of electronic fundraising, SMS, text, telemarketing, online registered users, things like that, all that digital thing needs to be done in a very moderate cadence. And what I see repeatedly now is that digital is actually used too aggressively, which is not enhancing fundraising. We've got a lot of statistics on that. But the problem with the digital infrastructure is you're paying for infrastructure, you're adding a lot more applications, and then you're adding actually very expensive labor to be able to run these systems, if you can even retain them. So the challenge is to get the cadence right. When you look at the implicit cost per engagement, it's actually pretty high when you think about everything you have to be able to depreciate, or amortize into the individual solicitation. So there's no easy way out here. The easiest thing to do, or the smartest thing to do, is to say, how do I understand my individual donors? And how do I personalize the engagement with them? And what insights could I have about how to do that? And that's the area that we can provide help with that I'll be talking about further. So net here, as I mentioned earlier, the only increases we were really seeing in fundraising of any kind of material manner were from episodic giving. The trick with episodic donors is to recognize them for who they are. There's nothing wrong with them. It's a great acquisition strategy to get people motivated behind the cause. The most important thing is know who they are, know their donor behavior, and then know how to renew them and know how to ask the right amount at the right time, in the right channel, at the right cadence. And that's the way you beat inflation, is you're in a situation of tailoring your engagement to the needs of the donor. But what we saw, as I mentioned earlier, fewer donors, smaller gifts, and when you factor in inflation, negative net increases in fundraising. So if I look at the 5 things I want to impart today, the first one is on improving net proceeds from fundraising. So as we go into this particular section of the discussion, I'd like to get your responses on this so I can frame my comments around your orientation here. I would like to know, how do you determine how much to ask of a donor at a specific moment in time? So the first option here that we'd like you can pick as many as you wish in terms of what is pertinent to you. But the first one we see a lot is most recent contribution, MRC, or highest previous contribution, times some multiple. The standard one we see all the time is 1, 1.5, and 2. Nothing wrong with that. It's a very good formula. It's been used for decades by most people in the industry. The next one is, well, maybe on the higher end, I've got some wealth and capacity screening. And most of the direct response fundraising has nothing to do with wealth or capacity, but I can see as you move up in the giving ranks how invaluable that can be into knowing whom to target. So I'd love to see if anybody is doing that. Pick as many as you wish. And then segment of 1, are you personalizing your gift array values in some particular method? Now, if I haven't captured the way in which you do things with A, B, and C, there's an other here, so you're welcome to check that as well. And I would love to see in the chat, or maybe through follow-up correspondence, what is the other? Because we're always curious about how people do things. So if I move in here, we've got a lot of good answers here. Look at MRC and HPC is about 70% of the population. We see this all the time, by the way, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's exceptionally good for not having an alternative. But this is basically, it says, let me look at history and give some multiples. Very logical. But so the problem with that is you're looking at history. So we'll talk more about how to do this in a way that is more about real-time sentiment rather than last year's sentiment. So there's some good opportunity for advancement here. Wealth and capacity screening, about 40%. That's great. That's a wonderful tool for the higher end giving. Segment of 1, you're doing 7.7%. I would love to know how you are doing that, because this is where our patents lie, is in segment of 1, personalization and nonprofit fundraising with AI. And we haven't licensed it to anyone. So I would love to know how you're doing personalization so I can have a better idea of what's out there. And then last is other. Love to hear what your other is in the chat so we can keep our awareness of different capabilities and technologies or approaches in mind as we think about speaking with you. So if we look at improving net proceeds, net is it just simply an equation that you're very familiar with. It's the average gift times the number of donors minus the cost of solicitations. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the focus we had with people over the last few years was the average gift times the number of donors took precedence over the cost of solicitations because those costs are being driven down. Now that that has reversed itself and we've developed services that understand donor sentiment in real time to address them, it gives you an opportunity to focus more profoundly on net improvements. And so as you go forward and you think about the capabilities that are out there, we want to leave you with the idea that with a simple service and these artificial intelligence capabilities that we bring to market under the nomenclature of behavioral economics AI, BEM-Ai, that you can get in real time the correct value to be able to ask of a donor with a great campaign. We can't replace a great campaign. We market beautifully with all the marketing agencies out there. But if you have a great campaign, a great appeal, then asking the right amount is just that last icing on the cake. It's the opportunity to be able to get the most attractive value in front of the donor at that moment in time to be able to help them make a gift as quickly as possible at the optimal level. And then optimize lifetime giving. You can't do that without retaining donors. So the most important part of the equation for us is retention first, then lift, and then advancing donors across donor segments over the course of time. And we see our algorithm doing a beautiful job of understanding by campaign type where the donor exists, how to find them at the right place in terms of the demand curve, and then how to advance them over the levels of giving over the course of time. And then for optimizing solicitation costs, we are focusing on reducing the cost of the direct mail volume while helping you optimize the return on investment in your digital infrastructure. Those are the two areas. If somebody is in a situation where they're using the digital infrastructure and it's driving away donors, then that obviously would not make that platform as effective financially as it would be to get good response rate, get good giving levels, and make sure you're using it with the right cadence at the right time. So if we look at the next piece of information here in summary, net is we want to have you focus with us on improving net proceeds. And you'll see some calculations on this a little further in the deck. But the opportunity is simply to get the cadence correct and get the values correct. And you only do that by measuring donor sentiment in a one-to-one personalized manner at the moment of the solicitation. So the second point I'd like to leave with you is optimizing donor lifetime value. First of all, retention, I've mentioned this a few times, knowing precisely how much to ask today by channel of engagement. So you may have a different experience by email versus direct mail, and then advancing donors over the giving segments over time. So the improving of giving levels, this is the classic challenge that we see in the marketplace, whether it is 3 values that you are asking in a gift string or 4 or 5 or 6, the opportunity is to make sure that you're asking the right amount to the individual donor. And what we see too often is that there are amounts that are either standardized or there is a multiple that's standardized against a previous giving level that really determines how much is being asked. And sometimes these gift array values are too large. So that, as I mentioned, 3, 4, 5, 6 values are very common. But in this case, I'm giving you an observation on the 3. So if 3 is $100, $250, and $500, that's what you're concluding in terms of how to ask the donor of a gift. In this particular example, if the donor is looking at wherever they are on the demand curve across these values, there's 25% of unrealized value, mathematically speaking, by having broad gift array values like that and then providing them to the donor. And what I mean by broad is that 1, 1.52 or multiples like that. So the idea is to specifically find where the donor exists on the demand curve. So if this value in the low ask is 100 and the donor is below 100, by asking 100, you're alienating the donor and they're not going to make any gift at all. So what you want to do is build the gift array value around the person's giving level below $100, which could be 25, 50, and 90, something like that. We don't do symmetrical value acquisition or estimates all the time. The first value is the value that is the targeted value that we believe is correct for the donor. And the second two are measures of elasticity that we're always testing. But the idea is to find the donor where they exist and ensure that the giving values are associated with their behavioral cues and that you're optimizing their participation in the fundraising campaign. So what we're looking for here is the unique point of equilibrium between that donor's sentiment and your cause. And that's what we can do with sentiment modeling, with behavioral economics and artificial intelligence services. And we do this on a 30-day rhythm. So you can use these gift arrays for about 30 days. And we find that after that, they tend to shift a little bit. And in a volatile environment, there is no more invaluable tool, especially as it pertains to retention, than there is to get the right amount to the right donor at the right time, so that every single month they're getting the fresh values that make sense for their level of commitment to the cause. So if we look at fundraising methods, there's the classic of major giving, which is wonderful. You get somebody that has a skill set where they can relationship build because it warrants it economically. Maybe the giver, the donor, is making a gift of over $25,000 or over $50,000. And as a result of that, you need to have a giving officer involved because they understand the motivation of the donor very personally, and they understand the timing of the gift. They understand the value of the gift. And through that socialization, they're able to optimize the relationship between the cause and the major donor. So if we think about the alternative models, which would be on the lower end of giving, say below $10,000 or below $100 for most of this stuff, we see it's broader giving segments. It's simply using a standard segmentation process like recency, frequency, and monetary value. And then it's looking at the transaction history and then having something that's available, it's easy to use. And we've already illustrated that with the HPC or the MRC plus the multiples. So what we're doing is we are doing the opposite of that. Is we're trying to take what the major giving officer secures in terms of behavioral cues. Now, we're not going to be as good as a human being, obviously. That's a very subtle skill set for a major giving officer. But what we can do through our experience is we can identify in segment of one orientation for giving arrays is we can be in a situation, we look for the behavioral cues, and we subtly can extract the insights about where that donor has some elasticity or inelasticity. So in some cases, we will ask less to sustain the donor, or we will ask a little more to sustain the donor based on where we see the opportunity. And the insight is coming on a 30-day rhythm. So we're getting that personalization because we're looking for behavioral cues, and we're doing it on a segment of one basis. And because we don't know the donor, we're just modeling their behavior, no PII, modeling their behavior back with regard to the nonprofit organization. So we're removing the bias that's associated with having PII and the issue of creating a homogeneous donor pool by focusing on PII as a way to determine giving values, because demographics or address or surname are not the things that determine somebody's giving potential. It's their emotion, it's their sentiment about the nonprofit, and making sure that their gift resonates with themselves about the advancement of the cause that you are providing as a service. And as a result of that, we find that when we do this dynamic personalization and optimization at scale, we just get better giving. And it's a very simple thing to do without having to learn anything about how it's done. So we're delivering dynamic personalization and optimization at scale. As I mentioned earlier, we do this across direct mail as well as all of the digital channels. We love direct mail. We start there all the time. We have modeled it over and over again to see how influential it is relative to the giving potential in an organization or of the donors in an organization. But we also know that we have to have all the other channels in sync relative to the donors that are in those channels, or if they're the same donors across the channels. So we model for both of those. We look at what are the right values by channel and what is the right rhythm by channel. So this is where the trick is knowing that as you think about managing inflation effectively by being very surgical with your investment in soliciting an organization or an individual, and that the organization is optimizing its return from doing that. We also have found recently that if we understand more about the marketing rhythm and just simply the content that's used and when it's going to be used, that is very influential as well in determining with our AI services the combination of how the marketing rhythm should work as well as how the solicitation rhythm should work in fundraising. This is just an illustration here that I wanted to make on direct mail, but like I said, it can be email as well. What I wanted to point out here is this is MAP. Some of you may be familiar with it, but what I like about what they're doing here is they have a brand compliance solicitation, and we provide these ask amounts. That's all we do. Their marketing agency provides the solicitation card, which you're not seeing is on the top of this, and this is the gift card. And then all we're doing is providing ask 1, ask 2, and ask 3. And then what they're doing, which I really love, is they're converting the amount that's being asked, like say it's $115, to the number of children that they will help breathing with a nebulizer and albuterol. And as a result of that, because they're fundraising by medicine type, they're able to convert your gift into the fulfillment of the cause, which is the best thing you can possibly do. You want to be able to have the vision of the fulfillment of the mission inspiring their gift, and this is the right way to do it. So I love that opportunity that they use there. And then what's happening under the scenes, so as I mentioned earlier, we set up a pilot program for our clients as they first begin working with us. And what we do is we look at giving history and a bunch of other factors that we model as we take a look at your donor database. And then what we do is we create a control group and we create a treatment group so that we can test the fidelity of our services relative to your existing practices. So we try to make sure that very equitable, similar types of giving. So in this case, this was a donor group that ranged from about $100 up to about $1,000 in that range. Excuse me, not $100, $50 up to, $75. Get it right here. This was a group that was $75 up to $1,000 or $999. That's for this particular. It's a couple of clients we're mixing together here. We do that type of pilot a lot. That 75 to 1,000 is very typical for us. So if you look at the way the control group was set up, you have $68 in the average single gift in the control group. The treatment group is $69. The standard deviation is $94. The standard deviation was $96 for the treatment group. And what we look at basically is what happens after several months of testing. And this is the one thing that we try to make sure we're doing all the time, is change the shape of the distribution curve. And so we're not having any fewer donors here. You're having the same number of donors. So participation or retention is our first pivot. Retention does not change. It's getting the values of the giving to a higher level of giving and finding which donors in which moment in time are going to be the right ones to ask for a little higher level of giving, or which ones should you ask a little less in order to retain them. It's that mixture of elegance in getting this donor sentiment done correctly that allows you to optimize giving. So in this case, we materially shifted the distribution curve to the right. So like I said, same number of donors as the gray curve. It's just that we're shifting over to the right. If you look at the results here, I don't know why this took place, but this is over the last year, so there's a lot of inflationary impact here. But $68 started, they ended up at $53. $69 we started as the average gift, we ended up at 56. Like I said, I don't know why. But what's important is the standard deviation. This is the most critical thing. As we move the standard deviation in giving from $96 out to 112, whereas the standard deviation for the control group did not fare as well. Standard deviation for the control group was 94 versus an $81 range. And by doing that, we were able to secure in about a 10-month period, 142,000. This is for 2 clients we mixed together. And I show you this. It's a small pilot in this donor value, relatively small compared to the size of their file, of course. And for the 142,000, they paid about 60 some odd thousand. I remember the exact amount, but it's about 60,000 to get the 140. So you're getting a 2-to-1 payback at a minimum during this time frame. And this was only in the pilot, which then we can scale up beyond that. So you have a very healthy improvement in giving, material improvement in giving with a small number of donors and a very compelling return on investment during that time frame. Now, as I wanted to stress, this is the average dollar amount shifts. You can see the blue line during that pilot period, these 2 clients. As soon as this is their giving history. So if you go back 2018, 2019, 2020, that's their giving history, very similar. We put the pilot into effect, and then you start looking at this period of time, which is a little over 10 months. You get a shift in giving that was important and material, as you saw in the dollar value, while if I look at the active donor count, after the pilot, you are maintaining the response rate. So you're not losing donors to get more money. You're having more donors, and you're getting more giving. And for those of you who know Shannon McCracken, I loved her quote with us a couple of years back where she said it was interesting for her because she had more donors providing more gifts, and that was her experience at Charity Navigator when she was the Chief Development Officer there. She's subsequently gone on to lead the TNPA, as you know. So if I look a little further in the deck here, we also look at performance by donor segment. So we don't manage performance by channel, and we don't measure by channel, and we don't measure by campaign. That's just not what we do. We're not a technology for either of those orientations. For us, it is about how is the donor behaving, and can we look at the donor's behavior and predict how much to ask them, and then can we advance them while retaining them over the giving segments? Are we moving donors up through the ladders of giving? So we look at this with every client briefing, and this is particularly important in an inflationary period where giving is going the opposite way, outside of episodic, as I was mentioning. So in this no historic average, but they come in as a first-time donor, how much do we ask them? We're doing better. And then so on and so forth. Through the levels of giving over here on the left, you can see less than $25. Come over here, we've got about a 15% better level of giving. Like I said, this is not replacing the cake being the great campaign that you develop. This is about getting a nice cream cheese frosting on that carrot cake so it just tastes a little bit better. You get a little bit better giving and the opportunity to move donors while sustaining them throughout the levels of the giving ladder. So if I come here, $25 to $49, you can see if I come across here, it's 36% better giving and so on and so forth. So every level of giving, we're making an improvement. Now, I hate to show you this because nobody wants to deal with the reality of the inflationary environment, but we are dealing with some donors who are providing smaller gifts. And the reality of it is we report on this every 3 to 4 months as soon as the learning cycle is completed. We usually go through about 3 learning cycles in a pilot period, which takes about 9 to 12 months. The algorithm is getting better and better and better over each learning cycle. And what we are doing basically is trying to make sure, can we retain them even if we have to ask a lower level of giving? So in this case, between $500 and $999, you can see that the gift we secured was $50 less than the previous gift that they had provided, even if they had been using our technology. But the control group was getting $100 less. And so the opportunity is to retain donors and then be in a situation where they're giving it the optimal value for that moment in time. This is a couple of different scale that I want. The 0 is here in this scale, and 0 is over here on the right on this scale. But these are for the higher end donor giving segments, 1,000 to 2,499, and then over 2,500, which goes up to 10,000 with us. And it's the same idea. As you might be in the highest level, the gift is $1,000 smaller, but you retain them, you secure the gift. Whereas if I look at the control group, they were down about $3,300 in the average gift. So by staying in the game and staying in the game at the most forceful level to advance the cause, you win in an inflationary environment. And this is what individual personalized behavioral modeling provides you in terms of being able to mitigate the effect of inflation. So if I look at, this is 2 of our clients mixed together. They're in the emergency relief sector. We're keeping the results anonymous. But this is what happened with these 2 clients, is they ended up getting lift over the course of about, this is about a 10 to 12 month period, where they're able to increase in just a pilot, a small part of the file, they were able to increase materially the dollars, the raw dollars that they were generating, not just the percent lift, but also the raw dollars. I know these clients well. They also got a 2-to-1 payback. So they're, and this is not for the high-end giving. This is for below $100, where they were struggling to get higher gifts out of these individual donors for the organization's cause. And we were able to come in and put our technologies in place and help them on the numerator side to find the sweet spot with the right donors to advance giving at a very healthy ROI. So in this case, the number over the period of time was $795, $750. The return on investment was $223 for the year. So basically, this return on investment is like putting $1 in and getting $3.23 back. And so it gives you about a 223% return on investment. That was the story of these clients. So in summary, we focus extensively on retaining donors for that particular piece of optimizing the numerator lifetime giving, knowing precisely how much to ask at each moment in time to optimize their contributions and sustain them as a donor, and then advancing them across the donor segments in a very subtle and conscientious manner over the course of time. So if I look at the next thing I'd like to leave with you, it's personalizing relationship investment decisions at scale. And what I mean by this is not about a major giving officer saying, I'm going to reach out to someone at this particular moment. This is the opposite of that. It is knowing whom to solicit and engage when. And it is also, what we offer is the opposite of let's just mail everyone, which is the other thing we see in the market. Those are the 2 ends of the spectrum. So what we do is we optimize the solicitation cadence monthly. So we're updating the model monthly. We're providing you with an insight on donor sentiment on the value, as also about whether or not to engage in investing in a solicitation. So on the paper side, this allows you to reduce the cost per dollar raised. On the digital side, it allows you to improve the return on investment, because in either channel, if you excessively engage donors, you miss the opportunity to engage them at the personalized right cadence to inspire their giving. So this inherently allows you to sustain brand equity as well. So if I look at this, and this is a very common thing, we look at donor files in lots of different ways. We brought over a fascinatingly talented individual, Jeremy Rupp from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he's our VP of Data Analytics and Insights. And he and our Chief Technology Officer, Rachel Michael, do tremendous work together to understand what's going on when we see these models performing in each individual's organization. So this is one of our customers, and what this is basically is, actually this is 2 customers, I'm sorry, 2 customers who blended together. It's a very common profile. It's 93.9% of the solicitations produce 0 return. And this is a direct response phenomenon. So what it tells you is their response rate is 6%, basically. However, and this is important, almost 70% of the solicitations sent to individuals did not provide any donation. So the opportunity really, with especially direct mail, where you're sending out expensive pieces of mail that can cost 50 to 90 cents per unit, is you want to be in a situation where you identify quickly those individuals who are in this 69.8% category where they just don't provide a gift. And it's not that you never solicit them, but the actions that is recommended here, which we would support in terms of showing you whom not to engage at that particular moment in time, is to quickly identify and dramatically reduce the solicitation volume. Now, this does not mean that you take them from 12 or 18 solicitations a year down to 0. What it means is you solicit them when it makes sense for your particular organization. And then in that process, it doesn't mean also that you're only soliciting them quarterly. We're looking at each donor and determining what is the right amount of time to give between donation requests and whom to apply that to. So in this one, you could dramatically lower, like 75%, the cost of engaging these donors by only hitting them when it makes any sense at all, and doing that maybe in a process that's in line with their giving demonstrated behavior in terms of when they seem to have the propensity to make a gift. We never just disregard this whole file up here, this dark side. We might get it down to 4 times a year or 3 times a year, which we have a model to determine that, but it allows you a great opportunity to be able to reduce costs. The other one is more interesting, which is kind of my donor behavior, which means that I make a gift once a year. And if you remind me at the end of the year, because that's when I'm making my gifts, I know how much I've made, I know how much I've spent, and I know what my discretionary leftover is. And basically here in this white category, it's those who make a gift once per year. And the idea here is to solicit the person the fewest number of times needed to optimize lifetime giving. And if you get the marketing data in here and you know the rhythm of marketing, it's particularly interesting because you're marketing the cause, what's that rhythm look like? And then you're marketing then you're managing the cadence of the solicitation process. And if you get that just right, you'll find that you can save costs dramatically. Because I know for me, you send me a couple of reminders at the end of the year, I'll make the gift. And I don't need to hear about things during the year from a engagement process. Soliciting me because I'm not going to make a gift at that point in the year. Maybe October, November, and December, I start seeing those reminders coming in. And I've been receiving all the great information like I do from my alma mater about their success cases with students or success cases in research. So I'm inspired by the marketing content. And then for me personally, those last few reminders gets the gift. Finding the right cadence for the people in the white is the area where you have the great opportunity to sustain them while optimizing giving, and they're actively participating. It's just an annual gift. The last one is the area where it's the most fun. It's the green area, where the marketing campaigns are inspiring more than one gift. So the second appeal, the special appeal, second gift, you're in a situation where people are responding to those. So here it's knowing how often to solicit them, and then again, how much to ask at that moment in time. And by doing this, you can save a tremendous amount of money while enhancing your reputation with the donor, not eliminating the relationship with the donor. This is a combination of 2 clients we put together that illustrates this even more profoundly. And these are our bottom level performers, and they don't mind us sharing this stuff, but I wanted to make sure that you could see this specifically. Is if you look at the average count in solicitation for a year, up to these 14 solicitations in this illustration, and you look at the donation amount given in the pilot period, this is what we experienced during the pilot, what they're seeing is that this is where they should be in their cadence. For their whole donor base, not just for one individual. This is the whole donor base, because the more they solicit, the less money they're making. And so it's interesting, we see this actually quite phenomenally, quite similarly in other organizations, and it's an interesting phenomenon. It's not as dramatic as this one. I wanted to show you this one with that precipitous drop there. It's usually a little flatter, or maybe there's some slight increase at some points and then it comes back down. But the idea is our technology looks at this, it models donor sentiment, and then it determines whether or not it's economically viable and logical to solicit them, because you don't want people to drop off as a donor and you do want them to optimize their giving. So if I come a little further into this, this is an illustration that shows you about volume drop off in direct mail and how you can sustain your giving. So if I look at this, and let's say that this here we are, 0 reduction, right? It says 10%, but it's supposed to be 0 there. So 0% reduction. And what we're looking at basically is the linear cost. So let's just say for conversation's sake that each piece is 50 cents. And so you're in a situation where every time you're reducing a direct mail volume while sustaining donors and sustaining giving, you're saving 50 cents. So in this case, if I go a little further into this, the cost for this particular client was $500,000 in the month to be able to do the solicitations that they were providing in the marketplace. So they secured $1,250,000. So the delta between these two is how much they generated in net proceeds, as we were talking about earlier, are $750,000. If I come a little down the curve, and you don't have to go this far, on a monthly basis, the service we deliver determines whom you should be soliciting. And you could have a 10% reduction, a 12%, 18%, but we'll take from the file those who should not be solicited and remove them out. So if you send us 1 million records and we determine whom to solicit, and in this case, it's recommending a precisely 30% reduction, we would send you out of the 1 million files the 700,000 back with the gift array values in them as to whom should be solicited, how much they should be asked. So in this case, when you're dropping the volume by 30%, what happens is you're lowering your cost to $350,000 in this particular instance, and then you are raising 1,248, so $1.248 million. So the giving level has not shifted, but your cost position has had a major advantage while you are sustaining brand equity because you're not excessively soliciting people. And then what happens is you generate almost 900,000 instead of 750,000. So you have a $147,000 gain in the month in your net proceeds. And that's all that matters, is retain donors while improving net proceeds to advance the cause. And if I look at this tool a little bit further, it comes in this form. So when you're actually interacting with us on the tool, we'll show you how the tool sets up the appropriate optimal range and what we're recommending. And we can do this either with or without you in the sense of making the call, but if you wanted to meet monthly to look at it, this is what we'd be looking at. It's more granular level data than just what's being shown here, but this is the top level view. So what do we do in this case? We picked that 30% reduction, and that was the optimal level of giving, generating net proceeds, I should say. And so the gain was $147,532. And then what's here is the cost of that, $52,500. So you're getting a 181% return on investment, hard dollar cost savings. So now you can apply that to getting your fundraising costs back in line. So you can mitigate the effect of inflation going up by getting your distribution of donations down and containing that cost or putting it back in line. Or you can use the savings here to reinvest in some other area where you want to enhance fundraising when things are going really well. It could be anywhere in your operation. So in this kind of ROI, basically, you're getting, for every dollar you invest, $2.81 back. So 181% return on investment. We're delivering the service, so there's no implementation issue with your organization. There's no integration issue, and there's nobody there that has to be trained or nothing that has to change about your practices. We do all the work for our clients, and it allows you to free up these proceeds, as I mentioned, to get your costs back in line with what you need or to be able to invest elsewhere. And so the summary of that point is we can help you personalize relationship investment decisions at scale. So you're soliciting the right people at the right time with the right amount, and it allows you to get the best giving and lower your cost per dollar raised. In the last file, we have this technology. This is called the exact donor. It's delivered as a service again. And what we look at is not just can we reactivate somebody, is in the last file, who is the optimal donor to actually reactivate? Who's going to provide the highest level of giving? And the opportunity basically is to compete against typical models of recency where you have smaller gifts but a larger number of people, and it looks like this in terms of the shape. You know, you get a shorter lifetime with those types of donors. You get a shorter retention rate, obviously, and you're getting a high response rate, but a small average gift improvement. And then the propensity where people come to your museum or they're engaged in your, because they may have a person affected by the cause that you are supporting, and they believe that they want to advance the cause and they're passionate about it. You have a smaller number of people, relatively speaking, providing a higher gift. So in the lapsed reactivation, what we're seeing is a pattern like this. Their lifetime value is a little bit higher than the recency folks. Retention obviously is inherently higher. Response rate's a little lower, but they're making a much more material gift. What we do with exact donors, we're able to use psychological profiling, behavioral profiling, to be able to find an asymmetrical level of gift that exists by selecting the optimal donor from the lapsed file at that moment in time. And mailing the entire lapsed file is not the drill here. It's picking the less than 50% of the file that you can afford to mail or that you should mail, and then using this type of capability to know whom to mail. So you're getting the optimal level of both participation and giving. So this is the shape of what we produce for our clients. Is we have a lower response rate, but we have a very high donor lifetime value, so they're staying with the organization for a longer period of time, high retention, and very high gift. So I put in here a moderate estimate of a 35% improvement in the giving level. It's actually that or more all the time. So if I look at what I'm seeing here, this is I talked about mailing 35% of the file. I want to talk about that and how it performs. So the game with lapsed is not to mail everybody, because then you have no game really. You're just throwing solicitations out there and hoping for the best. But usually budgets limit the percentage of the file that you can engage. So in this illustration, we were at 35%. That's what the clients could afford, is 35% of the lapsed file. And what I wanted to illustrate here is that 35% of the file, when we look at where we're performing, we have a 56% higher level of performance than the recency model. You can see the 1.56 over here, and that's the gap over here. And when we look at the propensity model, we're 1.44 higher. So above the green line, we're 44% higher. And this is for a relatively moderate engagement, in the sense the giving level was only $50. Response rate from the lapsed file was 1.5%. And you can see the lift in return here, 83% return. So the idea is that there are ways of engaging lapsed that improve the fiduciary capabilities and the financial returns from your lapsed file that are more effective than today. And then lastly, what I wanted to cover is just measuring performance. I see this phenomenon a lot, which is direct attribution versus indirect attribution. It's very important that you understand the full impact of when you are asking where people are performing. If you contain it to a department, it's an isolated win by a department. Like if we're working only in direct mail and the direct mail group is saying, well, did I get those results or not? Well, it's looking at things in a very myopic manner that is not really effective in terms of optimal fundraising, because that's this kind of a game. So that's great, we made twice our money, blah, blah. But when we know how much we've asked of donors and we see their giving across other channels, you get this incremental view of their giving, is incremental value above this level, and the combination of the two really provide the optimal level of giving. So it's important to look at things by donor, not how they give in terms of the channel, because that really tells the whole story and shows the economic impact you're making. I'm going to skip this one real quick here. And then lastly, I just wanted to talk about the zero-based budgeting. I find this phenomenon to be extremely important, especially in fundraising environments where we have an opportunity to be more nuanced about where to make investments and where not. It's really critical when we think about building your budgets right now that you don't stay with something you invested in that the decision was made 18 months ago. It's important to be able to understand, what value scoring are you using in projects, what project risk and viability of the project is in place, and what ROI is being generated. When I led Microsoft's enterprise sector business as chief operating officer for 5 years in the US, I was able to use zero-based budgeting to quickly adjust my investments to be able to optimize our performance, and we had superior performance by using this capability. So I would ask you to think about two things in this section, which is make sure you look at the whole picture on giving, and make sure that you have a dynamic budgeting process in place and a dynamic relationship with your vendors, including your marketing agency and anybody else, that allows you to pivot to where the opportunity is, and we can provide you the insight on that opportunity, which helps you beat inflation in terms of giving. So that's basically it on the summary of the performance segment right there of using zero-based budgeting. Make sure it's well known. Express what financial returns you want, so that the obligation is on everybody you work with to deliver the performance you're looking for. So those are the summary points today. We want you to work with us to help improve net proceeds. We think we can make a material impact here, optimize lifetime giving. We'll personalize with you the relationship investment decisions at scale with machine learning, and we'll help you find new sources of value in your lapsed donor campaigns. And then we'd like to be able to work with you on a zero-based budgeting basis to be able to impact the way in which you are using agility to gain advantage in terms of your fundraising activities. So that's what I have for the day. I would appreciate any feedback you have. My email address is down below. It's mzg@arjunasolutions.com. I would love your feedback on the effectiveness of the presentation today, the content. If I didn't address some inflationary problems that you are experiencing right now, I'd love to hear what they are, because we have other services that I did not talk about today that are materially addressing different types of subtle problems with inflation that I'd be happy to address with you. So with that, I'm going to stop there, Amanda, turn the helm back over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we covered a lot of ways for nonprofits to address inflation. So let's see what questions we have. If you have any questions that you want to put in the chat or in the Q&A, and I will get to them. So someone asked, does it make sense to solicit on the anniversary of the last gift?
It's interesting. I was checking my timing here. I want to make sure that I'm staying on time. It's interesting relative to determining that by individual. So we don't have a specific, like an anniversary date type of thing. We believe you should be consistently soliciting individuals, and knowing whom to solicit when is the trick to that. And that's specifically the service we offer to make sure that you're optimizing giving.
Okay, and this one's not so much a question, but I'm going to toss it to you just to see if you have anything to add on what they're...
Sure.
Someone has, their CRM generates personalized gift arrays for online giving and makes ask recommendations based on a combination of donor giving history, propensity, and wealth capacity. They call it responsive listening. Did you have anything to add to that?
I'm very familiar with that. But that's a kind of a rote methodology to substitute for having like the subtlety or insight of a giving officer, you know, that would know those in much more detail. And what we're trying to do is actually measure sentiment. So in my personal opinion, none of the direct response fundraising has anything to do with capacity, zero. This is all about discretionary spend. So that factor in the model you're using is not relevant to direct response fundraising. And then the other pieces of history are important, but it's looking at history in the context of today's donor sentiment. And that structure you articulated, it does not do that. And so the subtlety is, how's that donor feeling today? And you may actually ask less to retain them. So I think what you'll find, and we're happy to do a side-by-side comparison test with a small pilot to demonstrate whether it's email or direct mail, that we can do a better job with sentiment modeling and optimizing giving while retaining the donor over a lifetime of giving.
Okay. Is there a specific campaign type or sequence that you would prioritize?
Great question. We love starting with renewal because that tells us a lot about the behavior of your active donors. And we do very diverse pools when we're actually setting up a pilot, for instance, if we're doing that. So we look at the different echelons of giving, you know, $50 and or 25 and below, 50 and below, 100 and below, so on and so forth. You know, so we have a good diversity of donors. And the renewal tells us all these cues about what a good donor looks like in terms of the sentiments that they express through our modeling, that we can observe in our modeling. And then we use that to then impart to lapse, and we use it to impart to then volume reduction capabilities.
All right. Do you need a certain volume or gift size to use behavioral economics and AI? Are there any mins or maxes that people need to worry about?
So usually we look at this by individual organization. So if we're setting up a pilot, the ideal state is that you have 100,000 solicitations a month, and maybe you're testing 20% of the file. So that gives you, 20,000 you're testing, and you put 10 in control and 10 in treatment, something like that kind of a structure. So that makes sense because then you get statistically accurate results. Now, what matters in statistically accurate results is the response rate. And so if your response rate is 1%, then that pilot may not work. If your response rate is 5 or 10%, then a smaller pilot than what I just described would work. So the response rate is the key thing because we have to have statistically accurate results. The other thing that matters is the average gift size. If the average gift size is $15, you're not going to see as much of an impact in that as you would if you have an average gift that's a little bit higher. Maybe it's $75 across the different giving levels. So the confluence of a few factors like that, those are not the only ones, are what we do with an organization to test what the pilot size should be. In some organizations, the pilot size, smaller ones, is literally 50% of the pilot. and in some it's 5%, depending on the size of the volume, response rate, average gift, things of that nature.
Okay. Reducing mail volume is counterintuitive. How do you know it won't hurt fundraising?
And this is why we do pilots first and foremost, because you can see the effect in, say, 5 or 10% of your file first. But I think we all know intuitively that there's too much direct mail volume going through individual donors. And all we've been able to do repeatedly is show what the optimal level is for each individual, not for a nonprofit. It's for a specific nonprofit in its relationship with a specific donor at a specific moment of time. And that sentiment modeling has been personalized. Sentiment modeling has been incredibly effective in sustaining donors and improving their giving by getting them on the right cadence.
All right, we have one that came in that it wants to know, do you have more specific recommendations for gift attribution in addition to simply watching the post-mailing donation trend?
I'm not sure that I would, we look at 40 to 50 different internal proprietary metrics that we're modeling with our 3 types of AI with each individual. So I would have to talk to you one-on-one to understand more deeply what you're asking me and explain it in more details. I'm not sure I can explain it other than to say that we're looking at a number of proprietary factors over the course of 10 billion records through the system that have given us a tremendous amount of insight on individual donor sentiment. And we use those insights at that kind of volume to help project what somebody would do in an individual organization at a specific moment in time. But I'm more than happy to take a one-on-one meeting and dive more deeply on those attributes.
Okay, and let's close out with this one. Given your experience in the nonprofit sector, what are the biggest barriers to starting or continuing to use these capabilities?
I'd say that the most interesting one is just momentum. If somebody basically has said, well, this marketing agency is doing it for me, so whatever they want to do is good with me, and not really actively involved in managing the ROI or managing what they're doing and how they are doing it. And there's a fine balance there because you do contract the marketing agency. And we have great partnerships with marketing agencies. We want a nice copacetic relationship. But if somebody says, we've already made those decisions, we're locked and loaded, we're not going to change, and that's taking place like 6 months before the budget's allocated and then 12 months in the budget cycle, you're missing the opportunity in a volatile fundraising environment. Like the number one word I hear now about this time is called the uncertainty of today's giving environment. It's this uncertainty in the economic environment, the uncertainty with how consumer sentiment is working. And if you'd made a decision 6 months before your budget and then you're locked in for 12 months, that is not a healthy way of operating things in a static way when you have a highly volatile giving environment. And that's what we're experiencing right now. Especially I mentioned with the episodic donors, you want to know how to identify them and re-engage and renew them at the right level. So I think being more dynamic and flexible about what you're using and how you reallocate budgets to be able to adopt different things that can help you get a better level of performance in real time. I think that's the thing we struggle with the most is people who are overly committed to a plan independent of performance or marketplace dynamics.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we're out of time for today. So thank you to Michael for his insight on to how to beat inflation. On behalf of NonProfit Pro and Arjuna Solutions, I want to thank you for attending today's webinar. Be sure to check out our webinar page to get information on all our archived and upcoming webinars. If you would just take a minute to fill out the brief survey that will appear on your screen next, we would be grateful. Your feedback will influence the webinars we bring to you in the future. I hope to see you at the next NonProfit Pro webinar.
Thank you very much. Take care.